me take a moment and do a very brief summary of the sense. I think everyone here believes the relationship of transatlantic economy and digital economy is vitally important. We've all indicated a desire to make it work better, evolve the proper rules and regulations, and how important, frankly, it is to get it right. But I'll push a little bit over the edge here and say, given all the member states in the EU, those of us who follow, we know there's a lot of internal discussion on how to proceed. This is not an easy consensus to get within the EU and not an easy consensus transatlantic. On many of these issues, there are, in fact, very strong divergent points of view, and that's why we negotiate, and we have such able negotiators to do it. But I would take advantage of the occasion of what's happened with Britain exiting the EU to make a point that outside observers at least sense that the kind of dialogue that has taken place often on many of these issues within the EU, Great Britain and a number of maybe 10 other countries have tended to have a model of approach which is less detailed, less prescriptive, more open to innovation and regulation when there is a need after that fact. Whether this is an accurate description, I think it's widely perceived. And there has, I think, been a fair amount of commentary in the last several days of whether or not Britain's exit, which is not totally going to happen right away, but what impact it will have in that balance of dialogue on some of the critical issues, and whether or not, frankly, Britain will, in internal dialogues while this process is evolving, will in fact be listened to or somewhat shut out as a voice to be heard and given weight to. I asked the Director General, I'm probing a little bit here, but I thank you for trying.
Thank you very much. Well, I mean, politics is about different ideas, and that's the case in Europe, that's the case in US. And you see also, if I may, on UK, I mean, I'm not sure that in the case of the referendum, the voice of the business people, the voice of the young people has been heard, if I can make a personal comment. Now, in terms of the balance within the EU, indeed there are countries which have a tradition which is more, you might say, market-oriented, others which have a tradition which is more command and control-oriented, others that come as fresh democracies, so pluralism is the rule. But I mean, in a way, it's also from this diversity that the Commission is able to make a synthesis. And as I said before, nothing really in terms of our intention to realize a strong and well-functioning internal digital single market is changed, and we will continue the way we approached it. Of course, it's a moment to listen very carefully, because that's one of the most important messages out of the referendum, that we have to listen even to the weak signs. But there's no reason, seen from the business perspective, that to worry that the line in Europe towards a business-friendly digital single market will change.
Thank you. Let me ask a question of Joel in terms of Privacy Shield, which obviously is very important to you, but could you give a sense of why it is so important to not just you, but frankly to a massive amount of businesses who conduct international business, to have something which is reliable and predictable?
Sure. So I mean, literally thousands of companies, U.S. companies and European companies, relied on the safe harbor for many years as the legal basis under which the data transfers that underlie the transatlantic economy could take place. And when the European Court of Justice struck down or invalidated the safe harbor, it did throw that legal basis into doubt and into jeopardy. Now, Facebook and lots of other companies around Europe and the U.S. have other legal bases for that they rely on for those transfers, including standard contract clauses. But it's really essential that the businesses know that going forward they're going to have, as they think about where to make their investments and what kind of investments to make, that they're going to have a structure that's sustainable, a framework that's sustainable. And as Alan pointed out, the Commerce Department, even before the decision, and the Commission have been working on a successor agreement that would strengthen the protections for European consumers while still permitting those transfers to go forward. I will say, even since the first version of the Privacy Shield was negotiated, it's become that much more important because there's been a decision, preliminary decision from the Irish Data Protection Commission that calls into question the legal basis of those standard contract clauses that I mentioned. What I think, one thing that, and has referred that now to the Irish High Court and potentially to the ECJ, one thing that's in the Privacy Shield that's been negotiated is the creation of this ombudsman. And what I think is important for folks to recognize is that the Irish Data Protection Authority, in reviewing the standard contract clauses, didn't take into account the new negotiated Privacy Shield, because obviously it hasn't been adopted yet. But those protections, like the ombudsman that have been negotiated by the Commission and the Commerce Department, actually provide protections that will be applied to standard contract clauses and other legal bases as well. So the Privacy Shield, the Privacy Shield agreement has become that much more essential in the intervening couple of weeks or months since it was originally negotiated. And I know that the Commerce Department and the Commission have since strengthened it further to address some of the concerns that the Article 29 Working Party and the European Parliament identified. And so we're hopeful that in the next couple of weeks, the Commission, the member states will send, I think, what is now an even more important signal than ever, that there's certainty and stability underlying the transatlantic relationship and economies.
Thank you. And maybe it's a good follow-up with Alan, and you've been in the middle of it. Are you confident that we can work out the kind of arrangements that we need in the privacy area?
We're taking nothing for granted, but we've been working hard on this. And as I said, I think we feel that the member states have agreed with many of the member states have agreed with our assessment that this is a strong framework for moving forward. I would just say, I'd echo some of the things that Joel said about the importance of this agreement, and it's not just for the 4,000 companies that use Safe Harbor, it's for also the many thousands of small companies and consumers in Europe and elsewhere who relied on that Safe Harbor and will rely on Privacy Shield to do business with those companies. So it's very important that we get this done. We've taken very seriously, as I mentioned, the feedback that came from the Article 29, the working group. This is the working group of data protection authorities. And we've been fairly, I guess I would call it maybe forward-leaning in really trying to address those issues. Press has reported on what some of them were. Certainly they were listed in the report of the Article 29 group, but in terms of things that we've been working on, they include issues around strengthening this ombudsman that Joel mentioned, working on issues around onward transfers and data retention and bulk collection, and we really think we've got language that really will, as I said, protect privacy, meet the standards of the European courts, provide certainty for industry. That language has been transmitted to the member states. As I said, we've got meetings coming up in a few days, June 29th, and then on July 4th. So we'll continue to be pushing forward, and we're hopeful. I will say, in parallel, we have been working to put together the back-end processes. It's not like there's simply a vote and then magically people will be able to use this. There's actually a real process involved in creating the back-end systems and the documents that companies will need to see to be able to use it. We've been working very hard in parallel to get those that ready, and our hope is that people will be able to use Privacy Shield very quickly after an approval in Europe.
Thank you. Richard, put you on the spot again. Considering Brexit and BT's business in the EU and US, where do you see the commonalities of telecom reform that are not going to be shaken by this? We've got net neutrality in business data services, you mentioned, but where could this create some unexpected problems, perhaps, in your industry?
Well, I think it goes back to one of the comments I made, that the technology is not a geopolitical issue. And where we need to really focus is on finding the way that we can focus on the basic competition law principles, rather than getting distracted by some of the things that are going on with the exit of the UK from the EU. You know, that is going to take at least, once Article 50 is triggered, 2 years. And 2 years is a very long time in the worlds that we're living in with technology changes. If we think back just 2 years ago, what things looked like, it's you know, the cycle time for reinventing issues is much shorter than that. There's also speculation, it seems, that you know, this is going to have some monumental change on the way that the UK deals with the rest of the world, and I don't think that's necessarily the case. There's already a template in place through their membership with the EU. There's a lot of issues that are problematic. You know, clearly, I think there was a lot of you know, concern around the UK population, around immigration and things such as that you also see across the US as well as other EU members. Those don't necessarily touch the technological issues that we're looking at here. In fact, in a lot of ways, we can use technology to enable that and to make the borders more secure, as well as make sure that when the borders are porous, that we have a better idea of what types of individuals are in different countries. So I think it's probably a little bit premature to speculate on how things may play out in that way. But you know, I'm hopeful, and I expect that there will be you know, a rational and mature approach to how not only the UK but the EU and the US look at the policies going forward to create a sense of stability for the citizens as well as the corporate users of the technology in this area.
Thank you. My next question will be to Julie, but in some extent to everyone. And let me do a prelude, which a lot of us have looked at what's happened in the internet, and we believe actually this may be the defining issue for the future, and history will look back and say, how did the internet get handled at this critical crossroads? How free is it? How open? How much censorship? How much surveillance? Will it be basically its positive side of enhancing opportunity, empowering people, creating wealth and opportunity, and to what extent the dark side of perhaps being used to surveil, repress, prevent, block communications? We know there are those out there in the world who have that darker vision as part of their priorities. I don't think we should kid ourselves that it is the openness, empowerment of the internet is a threat to some societies and governments. And the State Department is the lead on the broad internet governance issues, and I guess I'd like some sense of optimism or reality check on just how likely it is that EU and US working together are going to be a strong enough voice to prevail in the international venues that are out there against more authoritarian regimes. And I'll punctuate it a little bit with a statement that it is not always, well, that the governments that are fundamentally on the free and open side have within their own governments internal contradictions. We cannot always go forth to the world and say, do it our way, because sometimes they can point to us and say, the way you're doing it is the way we want to do it, and it's not. So you're hypocritical to object. So, and with that rather long introduction, Julie.
Thanks very much for that question. I came to State Department in 2013, and it wasn't too long after the World Conference on International Telecommunications, which was, I would say, a big shakeup in terms of how people viewed the threat to the free and open internet. And since that time, we've had the 10-year review on the World Summit on the Information Society. We had the ITU's Plenipotentiary Conference, which is where, if we were going to change the fundamental instruments of the Union, that change would have to take place. We've had the OECD Ministerial on the Digital Economy, where not only did OECD countries sign up to the Cancun Declaration, but we had 8 countries outside of the OECD sign up for principles of internet openness and free flow of information, the multi-stakeholder process, including Egypt, Argentina, Costa Rica, Colombia. And I think this is a sign that more and more countries are recognizing the value of the open internet to their economy, to their citizenry, and to their overall quality of life. And so I'm quite optimistic that we will continue to prevail. I'm realistic that countries who view internet openness as a threat to their way of life or their governance will continue to have those views, but I believe they'll be challenged greatly by the majority of countries which support the free and open internet.
Thank you. We have so many questions we would probably want to ask Director General Viola. I will just do some broad follow-ups, which he did address, but the digital industry, however we want to define the digital economy, is tremendously committed to data as a core part of what drives innovation. It needs privacy. We have various issues that have come up in terms of intermediary liability and the ability to we're talking about, to the extent there's a platform economy, that you have, in fact, users who communicate with each other. And to the extent that government attempts to deeply control the interaction between different sets of players on the internet by trying to control the intermediary that helps that connection, there's a great risk of, I think, chilling that interaction. And I suppose it's one of the areas I think there may be some instinctive disagreement and approach, perhaps on both sides of the Atlantic. Not severe necessarily, but a nuanced difference of let things happen loosely and flow, and if there are problems, deal with it after the fact versus ex ante, kind of prescriptive, upfront attempts to control. I wondered if you, just as you see some of those key issues playing out, where you see the evolution of some of those more controversial issues evolving.
Thanks very much. Before I answer this question, let me also comment on the US-EU relationship and what we are going to do tomorrow in the Information Society Dialogue. I think we are both having a complex web of relationship in the world, but we have, of course, very clear that the relationship between EU and US is a special one for many reasons. And probably the most important one is that we both recognize that internet is one of the greatest gifts given to the humanity in the last century. Really, it's an advancement for democracy, free speech, change, positive change, quality of life. And we stand both, on both sides of the Atlantic, ready to defend it. But also ready to put forward a positive agenda. I mean, explaining to everyone in the world why it's important to keep the internet open, why it's important to have free data flows, why it's important to keep solid constitutional principles about free speech. And if I can add a personal note, in my infancy now, when I was a young engineer, I was here in Washington working on the space station program. You didn't read the whole CV, but then you'll find it. And that was really, that was Cold War. And I mean, Europe and US started to say space is for the mankind. We need to cooperate together to give a signal. I think here in the digital economy it's a little bit like this. I mean, we have the internet, such a great gift, and we have to give a clear signal to the world that we are able to set a positive agenda. That whatever it's about closing the internet, using internet as a mean to incite hate and racism, this is not part of our DNA. And that's why in the dialogue tomorrow we have, of course, short-term issues like, I mean, the DSM and the issues burning about how to approach a business-friendly approach, but also long-term issues. We have in discussion on cooperation on what is going to be the future of the internet and how we can work together, and cooperation about understanding better the brain, the human brain. We have two large projects in US and Europe, and I think we can give answer through technologies to things that today have no answer. I mean, so again, setting a positive agenda in terms of what we can do for the citizens and showing how cooperation is important, and also the full support that Europe gives to the Global Connect initiative. So bringing internet not only open, but to every citizen as a mean for doing business, but also as a vehicle for democracy. Now, this said, I will not escape to answer your question. I think, again, looking at the US and Europe, they have both a very solid legislation when it comes to intermediary liability, probably the best of the world, and is based on the so-called safe harbor principle. So the Digital Millennium Act and the E-Commerce Directive. And I think both administrations have signaled over and over that there's no reason to change this, and we have said it 1 month ago very clearly, and we continue to be convinced that the safe harbor principle is one of the most important things to have a well-functioning digital single market. But of course, I mean, situations are complex, so in US there was a question how to balance internal security and privacy and liability of intermediaries post 11th of September. In Europe, similar questions are asked by governments. Issues like end-to-end encryption pose challenges for security agencies, and they asking questions. And then there are emerging issues like data ownership, software liability of applications, Internet of Things security. So there's no reason to change the liability regime, which is fundamentally right, but there are many reasons to both sides of the Atlantic to ask ourselves what are the right answers to those challenges.
Thank you. Other panelists want to comment? Alan?
You know, I would just chime in on the the Director General's first point about the importance of creating a positive agenda. I think it's an incredibly important point. Secretary Pritzker was at the OECD meeting last week and gave a speech there, and she talked about this and about the fact that part of what we really need to do is be making the case to people that this shared set of values is actually something that's good for people's lives. And part of what we also need to do, and she spoke about, is that she said, not just talk the talk, we need to walk the walk ourselves. We need to be embracing approaches that embrace these principles. So for us, that can mean things like concluding a good privacy shield agreement to show the world that we can protect privacy and do it consistent with cross-border data flows. In the US, that's something like promoting the IANA transition. This is the domain name system stewardship and transferring, making sure that is in the hands of a true multi-stakeholder international organization and transitioning the US government's role out of that. That's a difficult thing to do for a government, but it's something that shows that we are really committed to these principles. And I would just finally say, my first job out of college was working on this space station project, actually, and as a network engineer early in my career. And maybe it trains optimists, but I share your optimism, and I think it's because we believe that this really is a set of technologies, and this is a digital economy that really will make people's lives better around the world. But we can't be sanguine about it. We need to go out and make the case for that and explain it to the next 1 billion or 2 billion people who are coming online about why they should embrace this vision too.
It was briefly mentioned just now about Internet of Things, but this is obviously a tremendously growing aspect, which I don't think has been grasped with very deeply by very many people, but it's on everyone's topic of something to start paying attention to. Again, it involves a number of different policy areas, privacy and security and others. Maybe Alan, someone else, maybe give a little bit of description of how, has that become a subject between, in a transatlantic dialogue very much at this point, or not yet?
I don't know if it's become a huge topic, but I think it's something that we are paying attention to and will be discussing, and there's been some interesting there's been an interesting policy paper coming from the Commission on the topic. I will say this is something the Commerce Department's been keenly interested in. We know, and I will say personally, for a long time was a little bit of a skeptic about whether the Internet of Things was really like, I mean, we've always had an Internet of Things that were connected, but right, the technologists in the audience sort of agree with us too. But I think we are persuaded there is an important phenomena here that really merits attention from us as a community and from governments. Partly it's an issue of scale, the number of devices that are being connected. There are far more devices now connected to the internet than there are people on the planet, and that trend is going to only increase. These devices, they vary quite a bit, and there are really interesting issues that are going to come up about interoperability, about standards, about privacy and security of devices, especially in settings where, we don't expect to think about how to update do a security patch on our thermostat or on our refrigerator, and those are things consumers may need to think about. But we're excited about the opportunities for the Internet of Things. It's a huge market, trillions of dollars, literally, in economic opportunity in the next decade, and it's going to provide incredible services to people too. It's going to transform our cities by making them smarter. And so we're excited about it. The Commerce Department recently put out a request for comment. We got over 130 different comments. We're going through them now. We'll hold a workshop in the fall and release a green paper in the fall about the government's role. And we expect this to be an increasingly important topic that we will be talking about quite a bit in this dialogue, because it's going to be important for consumers and businesses.
Question? Yes.
Yeah, Christian Borgren from CCIA in Brussels. I have a question for Mr. Viola and for the US side as well. On encryption, in the EU we have a carve-out for law enforcement access to data in the EU's e-privacy directive. You're trying to extend that to online services. Do you see a risk that there might be a danger to encryption that you have come out in favor of? And what is the US government's view on encryption? Thank you.
Well,
Of course, I answer for the EU.
I'd be curious about your perspective on the US.
And my answer would be extremely cautious. The situation is as follows. Nothing in life is simple. For what concerns the security and privacy of communication, this is a very strong constitutional principle within the EU. So you can imagine that the new e-privacy directive will be very clear on this, that whatever is the form of communication we are talking about, privacy and security of personal communication must be protected. That's the law enforcement angle, which is not part in Europe of the e-privacy legislation, but was part of, I say was, and I'll explain in a second, part of the data retention directive, which the European Court of Justice, that now is very famous also on the other side of the Atlantic, has annulled. So we asked a couple of years ago the member state what they wanted to do on data retention, and they said, well, we go with national legislation. But this was another era altogether. So now we see a little bit of emergence of different judicial systems asking for handing over data to intermediaries, different responses from intermediaries. We see a little bit of confusion around. Now, is it enough to say that there should be European rules of data retention? We are thinking about it, but there's no definite decision. For the time being, the e-privacy directive will only be about e-privacy, so will not touch the issue of data retention.
Let me maybe throw in there, the encryption issue has risen to a level of visibility in the U.S. More than most tech issues ever do, because the leadership of a number of companies trying to make the point that as much as we all intellectually would love to find some kind of compromise, that security experts and the people in this area have a very difficult time creating really the kind of encryption which is needed to protect and make it secure and really provide the real certainty to protect security. I mean, it is often talked about as privacy versus security. It really is security versus security and privacy. And I think it's very difficult for people who haven't delved deeply into the technology to be convinced that it's very hard to find a way that somehow makes everybody happy. But at least a lot of us, I think, are very doubtful that that can easily be done, if done at all. And yet in the political sphere, it's frankly almost impossible to imagine a candidate not saying, well, we want everybody to work together and come up with a solution. And I guess in the U.S. political campaign, I'm not sure I'm happy or not, but I have a feeling it's liable to pop up again. And I was wondering to what extent grappling with that, the security component of encryption, not just the privacy component, has weighed as a major factor in the discussions within the EU and Transatlantic. Please, first, either Alan or Director General.
Well, why don't I'll say a word, and I don't know if Julie wants to chime in either on the U.S. perspective. I think that it's a well-taken point, and I think the President has been clear that we need strong encryption to protect security. At the same time, I think he has also been clear, and the administration's been clear, that that he's very concerned about the real challenges that poses for law enforcement and for national security, and that he challenges us, and we are to think about how we can address those issues. Now, we believe that the private sector is an incredibly important source of wisdom and help in addressing those issues, and we've chosen not to, the administration's position is not to pursue legislation, for example, around this at this time because of that. But it's a real challenge that has been posed. I will say also the Commerce Department has spent many years working on this issue. We're a source of, we do a lot of work on standards, for example, around encryption and some of the policy issues around it. And I would just note that, we understand, and I think the administration understands, that there are certain realities of mathematics and global economics that we face in trying to craft a solution in this space. One is that encryption is a technology that's widely available, and that means that no matter what we do here in the US, bad actors around the world will have access to it. And that's just a reality now, and we need to deal with it. A second issue is that there's an economic reality, which is if our companies here aren't the providers of strong security tools, others will. And so we need to craft policies that reflect those realities, even as we deal with the challenges that have been put forward for us. And I think it is very much a security versus security issue.
I must say I agree 100%. Also, see from the European perspective, first of all, encryption is a very important tool for businesses around the world to have secure interactions and for citizens to be protected. So we are strongly in favor of encryption. When it comes to the relationship with the public sphere, it really, I agree, will depend very much what is going to be the reaction of private business. Because one thing is to cooperate with democratic countries, as we are. One thing is to cooperate with countries which the democracy principles are dubious. And if in democratic countries there's a continual denial, refusal to cooperate, this will trigger a legislative reaction on both sides of the Atlantic. So that probably is to be avoided. It can be avoided. I think a good example is the recent agreement that we signed. It's a totally self-regulatory agreement with the major platforms in Europe to combat terrorism online, incitation to terrorism and violence. This has been a purely voluntary agreement, and I think it's probably the best way. Of course, there's another dimension, again I agree, which is we have to be careful as strong allies, US and EU, about encryption technologies and cyber technologies in general. I mean, we have an understanding and we know how to deal with conventional weapon control, and encryption and cyber weapons can be equally damaging our societies. I think in this respect our cooperation has to be even stronger to make sure that first of all we advance in encryption and cyber technology, and we control what's going on in terms of who gets access to those kind of technologies.
Joel?
Sure. I mean, it's hard. It's hard to improve on what the two gentlemen just said. Look, this is a very difficult issue. At Facebook, we're very clear in our policies that there's no place for terrorism, terrorists, or terrorist content, and we take a tremendous amount of affirmative action to try to make sure our platform is that content is on our platform. We were pleased to cooperate with the Commission and some of our sister companies in our sector on sort of formalizing that commitment to keeping terrorist content off our platform in the code of conduct that the Director General mentioned. I do think this notion that it's security versus security is an important one, and we see it all the time that our consumers and consumers of lots of different internet products are demanding greater and greater security for their communications and for all the other ways in which they're using the internet. And as Alan talked about in the answer to the Internet of Things question, this is going to get more important as we start talking about security around driverless cars and other things where people are really going to, that they aren't thinking about now, but are really going to want to make sure they have the strongest possible encryption. And we understand that this creates challenges for law enforcement. We deal with law enforcement both in the US and the EU every day. If there were a mechanism that the engineers and the technologists could figure out to limit the access to only those lawful efforts by democratic governments, you probably would see a different reaction. But that that's not what the technologists and the engineers say, and that if we try to introduce a backdoor or some other mechanism for access to encrypted data, we're not going to be able to ensure the level of security that our consumers are demanding today and that they're going to demand even more in the future. So we're just going to continue working with law enforcement and governments to try to combat terrorists and other bad actors from using our services, and also protect against terrorists and bad actors from accessing our services, and that's where encryption comes in.
Thank you. Any additional questions or comments? I would, yes, Dan?
Yes, my name is Dan. I'm with CCIA as well. Maybe kind of end on a lighter question, but I know both the EU and the US governments have done a lot over the last 4 to 8 years on reworking the actual structure of government, whether here on the panel, whether state, commerce, and DG Connect, to make their actual institutions more responsible to the changing digital economy. I know state and commerce have new economic diplomats focused on digital policy issues, whether it's digital economy officers or digital attaches. DG Connect has gone internally through a lot of structure. I wondered if any of the government panelists can talk what their agencies or organizations have been doing to focus more on these important digital policy issues.
I must say, thank you for this question. Because from the 1st of July, DG Connect will have a new organization which will be hopefully responding to the challenges of digital economy, digital single market. So we basically have reorganized in thematic areas. There will be a strong, we call it directorates, I mean a strong area on digital industries, which will have microelectronics, robotics, artificial intelligence, liability issues, and coordinate the efforts on digitizing industry. There will be a directorate on the network of the future. We'll have 5G, the Internet of the future, Internet of Things. We will have a digital single market directorate, an international directorate. We will have a media, which will have copyright, audiovisual law, and all what has to do with media, so also the traditional media. We will have many other directorates which all will be focalized on, of course, telecom and the rest. So we'll all focalize on the various pillars of a well-functioning digital single market.
Thank you. Somebody else? Yeah.
So I'll just confirm that we have set up a program for digital economy officers and are prioritizing our contact with key missions around the world where digital economy issues are looming large. We've also revamped completely our training for econ officers at the Foreign Service Institute to cover a much wider range of digital economy issues so that econ officers who go into the field understand privacy and data flows and a little bit of spectrum management and importantly who to contact in our office should these issues arise, so we can give them very on the spot support.
I would just chime in and say I think it's a great example of also, I think you're seeing across government a greater focus on digital economy issues. I can tell you within the Commerce Department there's a huge amount of activity going on. My presence, in fact, in some ways is a sign of it. First, Director of Digital Economy, which we've created a digital economy leadership team. There's just a tremendous amount of activity across the many different parts of the Commerce Department. My colleagues at the Patent and Trademark Officer here, a few folks from NTIA here. We are pulling all of that together and have created a digital economy agenda for the department for the first time, which includes issues like access and trust and promoting a free and open internet. We've done something similar to the State Department program. We have a set of digital trade officers, a new pilot program that we've created in conjunction and helped work very closely with our state colleagues in enrolling those out. We have a new digital economy board of advisors we've created to advise advise us on these tough issues. More broadly, I think you're seeing greater openness in government data, which is a huge push for us. Commerce Department creates something north of 40 terabytes of data a day, a lot of it coming out of the Weather Service, but we're trying to get more of that out into the hands of people. That's going to be a big area. I think a focus across government. Connectivity, Julie mentioned the Global Connect program, trying to get more people online in the United States, outside of the United States. So I would just, and I would just say the big efforts to get more talent into government. It's been a big push of the White House and within the departments to try to get more digital people with a high technology quotient into government. I would just say I think this is just a reflection of the fact that the digital economy is now really the economy, and we need to be thinking very broadly about how to make sure that we've got the talent and the agenda to promote the digital economy for people around the world. And I just think you're seeing here, a reflection of the fact that this is a greater and greater priority for all of us.
Thank you. Let me close it out by saying tremendous opportunity here at the conjunction of our Transatlantic Policy Dialogue Forum and Brexit. I think we've not tried to lean too heavily on the Brexit issues, but they're hanging there. The reality is we live in a connected and global economy. I think the internet economy and the consensus of everybody here, I think, makes it clear that the prosperity, growth, and jobs of future generations are tied to this economy. And at the same time, the globalization, I think we have to probably recognize that some of the grievances, legitimate grievances that have been recently expressed in the popular uprising in various places, have some, there may be a mixture of what I would consider more legitimate and other non-legitimate, but there are some really important legitimate considerations. And I hope they are taken into consideration as we move forward with this internet and global economy. Because if these forces get out of control, they will harm innovation, they will harm civil liberties, trade, and prosperity. So to the extent we can self-correct and deal with some of the underlying problems that perhaps have not received adequate attention, as we set up our rules and global standards, we do a lot to provide ourselves a defense against things going off the rails in the future. With that, let me just say thank you very much. An excellent panel. They have all shown how knowledgeable, insightful, and important roles they play. And it's an honor to have hosted you today. Thank you. And thank you all.